The gun was already cocked when Abigail realized she had worn her good heels to the wrong address. She stood in the middle of a penthouse she had never seen before, holding a tray of catered food she had never agreed to carry, wearing a black dress that belonged to her colleague Jae-yoon, who was currently unconscious in the supply closet downstairs. The two men pointing weapons at her were not smiling. The chandelier above her head was worth more than her entire village, and somewhere behind her, a door had just locked from the outside. She did the only thing that made sense. "I have jollof rice," she said, lifting the tray slightly. "Nigerian style, nobody shoots the woman with the jollof rice." Nobody lowered their gun either. This was not how Abigail Osa had planned her Tuesday. She had planned to deliver flowers to the Lot Hotel lobby, collect her tip, argue with her supervisor about the broken delivery bike, eat her packed lunch under the Han River Bridge, and go home to her tiny Mapogu apartment where her roommate Blessing would be watching a drama too loudly and denying it. That was the plan. A perfectly sensible plan for a perfectly sensible woman. But Jae-yoon had called her at noon, voice shaking, begging her to cover a catering delivery to a private address in Gangnam. Not the regular Gangnam. The quiet part? The part with no signage on the buildings and security cameras that tracked you before you even turned the corner. Jae-yoon had said the client was generous, that the tip alone would cover Abigail's overdue electricity bill, and that all she had to do was take the service elevator to the 42nd floor and leave the food on the table. Simple, Jae-yoon had said. Jae-yoon was a liar. Abigail had taken the elevator. She had found the floor. She had pushed open the door that was slightly ajar, stepped inside, and immediately walked into what appeared to be the tail end of a very serious meeting between men who did not appreciate surprise guests. There were files on the table. There were phones flipped face down. There were 3 men in expensive suits who had all gone very still when she entered, and 2 of them had reached for something at their waist that she sincerely hoped was a wallet. It was not a wallet. "Delivery," she had said, because her mouth sometimes operated independently of her survival instincts. That was 60 seconds ago. Now she was standing here with jollof rice and a very uncertain future. The man at the far end of the room had not moved. He sat at the head of the long table, jacket still perfectly pressed, one hand resting flat on the surface in front of him. He had not reached for anything. He had not flinched. He was just watching her with the kind of calm that suggested he had seen far more alarming things than a Nigerian woman in borrowed heels, holding a catering tray. And none of them had managed to disturb his afternoon. He was also infuriatingly, extraordinarily good-looking. Abigail mentally slapped herself. This was not the time. "Put it down," he said, not to his men, to her. She looked at the table. She looked at the guns still pointed in her direction. She walked very carefully to the nearest flat surface, set the tray down without spilling a single grain of rice, straightened up and turned back around. "Do I get a receipt?" she asked. One of the armed men made a sound. She could not tell if it was offense or the beginning of a laugh. Either way, the man at the head of the table raised 2 fingers and the guns disappeared. Just like that. As if they had never existed. The men stepped back. The tension in the room dropped several degrees. He stood up. He was tall, not just tall in the way that men looked tall in suits, tall in the way that made a room rearrange itself. He walked around the table without hurrying. And Abigail stood very still because she had learned early in life that when you did not know what kind of animal was coming toward you, you did not run. He stopped a few feet away and looked at her with eyes that gave nothing at all away. "Who sent you? A very irresponsible coworker named Jae-yoon?" Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile. Something smaller than that and more dangerous. "Name, hers or mine? Yours, Abigail. Korean name? I am not Korean. I can see that." He looked at her for another moment with the same unreadable expression. "You're not afraid." "I am extremely afraid. I am simply choosing to process it later when I am alone." This time something actually moved at the corner of his mouth. He turned away before it became anything identifiable. "Take the elevator down. Tell no one you were here. Your delivery fee will be transferred by end of day." Abigail picked up her empty tray. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She waited. She got in. She waited for the doors to close. Right before they did, she heard one of the men at the table say something in low Korean, and she heard the man at the head of it reply in a tone so flat and final it required no translation. The doors closed. She exhaled for the first time in 4 minutes. His name, she found out 3 days later entirely against her will, was Kang Hajoon, and he was not the kind of man whose name you found out by accident. She found it out because he came into the flower shop, not the hotel. The flower shop where she worked her second job on Thursdays and Fridays, a small place tucked between a dry cleaner and a phone repair stall in a neighborhood that had no business receiving men in $70,000 watches. He walked in at 11 in the morning like he had always known the address, and Abigail, who was elbow-deep in a bucket of hydrangeas and had dirt on her left cheek, looked up and felt her entire nervous system file a complaint. She said nothing. He looked around the shop with the expression of someone conducting a quiet inspection, then looked at her. "Roses, 2 dozen, white." She pulled herself out of the bucket. She wiped her hands on her apron. She went to the display wall and began selecting stems with the focused energy of a woman who was absolutely not thinking about guns. "You remembered me," he said. "You're difficult to forget. Most people find me difficult to approach. I am not most people." She held a rose up to the light to check the bloom. "Also, I approached you while 2 men had firearms aimed at my torso, so the baseline is different." There was a pause, then very quietly, "Fair point." She wrapped the roses. She tied the ribbon. She named the price. He paid without looking at the amount, which was the kind of behavior that made normal people furious and apparently made Abigail's pulse do something she would not be documenting. He picked up the flowers. He turned to leave. "Kamsahamnida," he said at the door without turning around. "Thank you." She stared at his back until the door closed and the bell above it finished ringing. "Aish," she said to nobody. Blessing, her roommate, had absolutely no sympathy. "He came to your job? The Mafia man came to your job with his watch and his flowers and his cheekbones." Blessing was sitting cross-legged on their shared sofa, Fufu in one hand, her phone in the other, giving Abigail the full attention of someone who had just been handed premium entertainment. "Abigail, baby, this is a drama. This is a problem." "Same thing," Blessing pointed her phone at her. What did his voice sound like? Blessing. Like gravel, like a radio announcer. Like the second male lead who's actually better but always loses. "I am not discussing his voice." "So it was good." Abigail threw a couch pillow at her. Blessing caught it without flinching because she had years of practice. She had been Abigail's closest friend since they were both 22 and newly arrived in Seoul. Wide-eyed and broke, and sharing one electric blanket between them in a gasiwan that smelled faintly of instant noodles. They had clawed their way up together, gotten proper apartments, proper jobs, built a life that made sense. Abigail was not supposed to be developing complicated feelings about men who had armed security and zero facial expression range. "You're going to see him again," Blessing said. "I am not." "You are. This is how it starts. Next time he'll find you at the river or outside your apartment, or you watch too many dramas." "I watch the correct amount of dramas. I watch the amount that prepares a person." Blessing took a satisfied bite of fufu. "What's his name?" Abigail paused for 1 second too long. "His name is Kang Hajoon," she said, and Blessing screamed so loud the neighbor knocked on the wall. She saw him again in 4 days. Not at the river, not outside her apartment, at the police station. She had gone to file a report about her stolen delivery bicycle, which had been taken from outside the convenience store on a Tuesday evening by someone with the audacity to cut a quality lock. She was sitting in the waiting area holding her numbered ticket and composing a mental speech about community safety when Kang Hajoon walked in through the front entrance of the district police station with the loose, unbothered energy of a man who had not spent 40 minutes on public transport to get there. He saw her immediately. She saw him immediately. They stared at each other across the width of a police station waiting room while a ceiling fan rotated overhead at a pace that suggested it too had given up on life. He came and sat down beside her. "You're here to report something," he said. "My bicycle." A pause. "Your bicycle." "Someone stole it. It had a basket. I used it for deliveries." She looked straight ahead. "Why are you here?" "Routine." "Routine," she repeated. "You come to the police station routinely." "I have an arrangement with the captain." She decided not to explore what that meant. She looked at her ticket, B-47. The screen above the desk currently showed B-31. "You could have the bicycle replaced," he said. "I could also win the lottery. Neither thing is happening today." "I'll replace it." She turned and looked at him. He was looking ahead. His jaw was set in that particular way that seemed to be his default, like he had decided years ago that the world did not require his softness, and had simply moved forward on that basis. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know, I wasn't asking. I know that too." She looked at him for another moment. "Why?" He turned and met her eyes. Up close he was worse. Better. She could not decide. His eyes were dark and they were looking at her with the kind of directness that most people reserved for contracts and confessions. You didn't run, he said. The other day, most people run. I told you I was afraid. I was simply processing it later. I know. The corner of his mouth moved again. I found that interesting. B-37 appeared on the screen. Abigail looked back at it. Her heart was doing something she would be reporting to no one, especially not Blessing. I don't want your bicycle money, she said finally. Then let me buy you coffee. She opened her mouth. Not as payment, he said before she could object. Just coffee. She closed her mouth. B-38. There's a place 2 streets from here, she said. They have Bungeo-ppang. The real kind, not the frozen ones. I know the place. Of course you do. She looked at her hands. Fine, coffee. Neither of them said anything else. They sat in the quiet of the police station while the numbers ticked forward, and for reasons she could not yet explain, the silence did not feel uncomfortable at all. What Abigail did not know, what she could not have known sitting in that waiting room with her numbered ticket and her stolen bicycle problem, was that Kang Hajoon had been watching her for longer than 4 days. Not in the way that sounds alarming in daylight and worse at night. In the way that a man like him watched anything that surprised him, which was methodically, and with more attention than the subject would ever suspect. He had run her name after she left the penthouse. Not because she was a threat, because she was not one, and that itself was unusual. Every person who had ever found themselves in that room accidentally had either panicked or tried to leverage the information. She had offered him jollof rice and asked about a receipt. He had not been able to get that out of his head. He knew she worked 2 jobs. He knew she lived in Mapogu with 1 roommate. He knew she had been in Seoul for 4 years, and that she sent money home every 2nd month. He knew none of this from surveillance in the sinister sense. He knew it the way a man who had survived a very particular kind of world learned to know things, by looking, by listening, by filing away details that other people discarded as noise. He had not planned to go to the flower shop. He had been passing. He had stopped. He had not planned to sit down next to her at the police station. He had seen her through the glass door before he entered. He was, if he was honest with himself, which he did not often choose to be, finding reasons. The coffee was good. The Bungeo-ppang was better. They sat across from each other at a small table by the window, and Abigail wrapped her hands around her cup and looked out at the street and asked him, without looking at him, "What do you actually do?" "Import and export." "Import and export," she said, with the tone of someone reading a menu item that does not match what arrived at the table. "Among other things. The other things are the part I'm asking about." He was quiet for a moment. He turned his cup on the table in a slow half-rotation. "You already know the answer." "I want to hear you say it." He looked at her. "Why? Because then I know if you're the kind of person who lies easily or the kind who at least hesitates." Something moved across his face that was not the almost smile, something older. "I run an organization," he said. "The organization is not entirely above board." "Entirely," she repeated. "There are legitimate arms. And the rest is not something you need details about." She looked at him steadily. He looked back. Outside on the street, a couple was arguing loudly about which direction to walk, and a delivery driver was shouting into a phone. And the city was being its complete normal self, indifferent to the fact that Abigail Osei was sitting across from the head of what she was fairly certain was one of Seoul's quieter, and therefore more serious criminal structures, eating fish-shaped pastry. "Okay," she said, "okay. I'm not a reporter, I'm not police, I'm not anybody connected to whatever you do." She took a sip of her coffee. "I just wanted to know if you were honest about it." "And you hesitated," she said. "Just a little before the entirely." That was good. He stared at her. For the first time, something on his face was not controlled. It was not overwhelming, just a small crack in the surface, the look of a man who had been genuinely caught off guard by something and had not yet decided what to do about it. "You are a very strange woman," he said. "I am a very tired woman who has 2 jobs and a stolen bicycle. Strange is relative." He almost smiled. She saw it this time, more of it, enough to know that when it fully arrived it would be a serious problem. She looked back out the window. She was already in trouble, and she knew it. Not the gun kind, the worse kind. The kind that came quietly, over coffee and fish bread, and did not announce itself until it was already everywhere. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, a bicycle appeared outside her apartment building with a bow on it that was frankly excessive. She had sent a message to the number Jayon had given her and said simply, the bow was too much. He had replied, "I don't do things halfway." She had stared at that message for longer than she would admit. They met 4 more times, each encounter carrying the texture of something neither of them had agreed to, but neither of them was stopping. Once at a Pojangmacha near the river, the small street-side tents with their orange vinyl and their army stew and their soju. He drank slowly. She drank at the speed of a woman who had been on her feet since 6 in the morning. He watched her eat with the expression of someone who had not been in that particular kind of ordinary scene for a long time, and was recalibrating what to do with it. She caught him looking and said, "What?" And he said nothing, and looked away, and the woman running the tent gave Abigail a look over the steam of the pot that communicated an entire opinion without a single word. Another time he had shown up at the flower shop again, not for flowers, just standing in the doorway for a moment before coming in. She had not stopped arranging the stems in her hand. "Are you here for flowers, or are you here to hover?" He had come in and sat on the stool behind the counter like he owned it, and they had talked for 45 minutes about nothing important. What she missed about home. Whether or not he had ever left Seoul for more than a week. The fact that he had a younger brother he did not speak about with any ease. The fact that her mother called every Sunday and always asked if she had eaten, regardless of what else was happening in the world. He had gone quiet at that. Every Sunday? Without fail, it doesn't matter what time in Korea, she calculates the hours. He had looked at his hands on the countertop. She had not asked what that expression meant. Some doors you did not push the first time, but there was a weight to all of it. The world he operated in was not a quiet one. She felt its edges in small ways. The way his phone went off and his entire posture changed. The car that sat outside certain locations a little too consistently. The moment at the Pojangmacha when a man she had never seen walked up, bent and said something low near Hajoon's ear, and Hajoon's hand, which had been relaxed on the table, had gone absolutely still. He had looked at her after the man walked away. "I have to go. I know. I'll go," she said, not unkindly. "I know." He had gone, and Abigail had sat with her half-finished soju and stared at the Han River in the dark and had a very frank internal conversation with herself about what she was doing. She was falling. She knew she was falling. She had known for at least a week. The problem was not that he was dangerous, though he was. The problem was not even the world he inhabited, though that was a real and serious concern. The problem was that Kang Hajoon, beneath all that controlled stillness and the suits and the men with firearms, was also gentle in a way he clearly had not planned. He did not perform it. It surfaced sideways, in small, unguarded things. The way he had quietly moved himself between her and a drunk man who stumbled too close on the street and said nothing about it. The way he remembered, 2 meetings later, that she had mentioned her phone screen was cracked and arrived at the flower shop with a replacement screen in his jacket pocket, as if that was a normal thing to carry. She had refused it. He had left it on the counter, she had kept it. She was, in the frank language she used only with herself, deeply gone. Blessing's response to this development was not helpful. "I knew it. I said it first. I said this is a drama. You told me I watched too many dramas. You do watch too many dramas, and yet here we are." Blessing was walking in tight, excited circles in their kitchen while Abigail sat at the table eating rice and staring at the wall. "Abigail, the man replaced your phone screen. He brought you to a Pojangmacha. He sat in your flower shop on a stool. Those are normal activities. For normal men. For him, that's basically a marriage proposal." Blessing stopped circling. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing, because it doesn't make sense. Because his life is what it is and mine is what it is, and they don't match up in any safe way. Love is not always safe. Blessing, please." "I'm serious." She sat down across from Abigail. Her voice lost the comedy and went somewhere genuine. "Abby, how often do you feel like this?" Abigail poked at her rice. "Exactly," Blessing said quietly. They sat with that for a moment. "I just don't want to be stupid," Abigail said. "There's a difference between stupid and brave. Those two things are separated by a very thin line. Then walk it carefully." Blessing reached over and stole a piece of egg from her plate. "Besides, if anything goes wrong, I will show up and cause a scene. I grew up watching my aunties argue. I'm not afraid of anyone." Abigail laughed for the first time in several days. It came out louder than she expected and felt like something releasing. "You're the worst," she said. "I'm the best," Blessing said, already reaching for more egg. "Now eat your food and call the man." She did not call the man. But 2 days later, at 7 in the evening, he called her. Not to talk, to ask if she could come somewhere. His voice was different. Not cold, not warm, something in between that carried an edge she recognized as controlled concern. He gave her an address in Yongsan. He said to come alone and not to tell anyone. She stood in her apartment with the phone at her ear and she said, "Are you in trouble?" A pause. "Not yet. Is this going to be a problem for me?" Another pause. "It shouldn't be, but I would understand if you said no." She looked out her apartment window at the Seoul night, all its lights and noise and layered lives going on simultaneously. "Send me the address again," she said. The address was a building that from outside looked like a logistics company, which she was beginning to understand was a description that covered a wide range of activities in this city. Inside it was different. There were people moving with purpose, screens on the walls, a low, consistent energy of something being managed under pressure. Nobody questioned her entrance. She suspected that meant he had told them she was coming, which meant he had been somewhat certain she would come, which she filed away under things to address later. He was in a room on the second floor, jacket removed, sleeves rolled to the elbow, standing over a table with a man she had not seen before. They stopped talking when she entered. He looked up. Something in him settled when he saw her. She caught it before he controlled it. This too she filed away. "What's happening?" she asked. He sent the other man out. He pulled out a chair for her. He sat across from her. He looked at her in that way he had, direct and quiet and without performance. "Someone knows about you," he said. "Nothing specific yet, that you've been seen with me, a competitor. It's being managed, but I needed you to know." She felt a cold thread move through her chest. "Managed how?" "You're not in danger, not immediately, but I want you somewhere that isn't your current apartment for the next few days. Just as precaution. Hajoon." He went still at his name in her mouth. She realized she had not used it directly before, neither had he hers. "I don't need a safe house," she said carefully. "I need to understand what's actually happening. I know, and I need you to not decide things for me. I know that too. Then talk to me." He looked at her. For a long moment the room was just the two of them and whatever was building between them that neither had named. Then he started talking. Not everything. She didn't expect everything. But enough. A rival faction that had been acquiring leverage by targeting people connected to him. The specific reason she had surfaced on their radar. What his people were doing to resolve it. What he was asking her to accept temporarily. She listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she sat with it for a moment. "Your life is very complicated," she said. "Yes. I want to be clear that this is not what I pictured when I carried jollof rice into your apartment." Something moved in his expression. "What did you picture?" "A normal tip and a fast exit." "I'm sorry. Don't be." She looked at her hands. "I stayed. Every time I could have walked away, I stayed, so this is also me." Silence. "Abigail." She looked up. He was looking at her with something she had not seen from him before. Not the almost smile, not the controlled stillness. Something exposed. Something that had clearly been living behind all of it for longer than this evening. "I didn't plan for this," he said. "You specifically, I didn't plan for you." "Neither did I," she held his gaze. "You specifically." The room was very quiet. "I don't know how to do this carefully," he said. "This particular thing. I don't have a record of doing it well." "I don't either," she said. "I've been careful my whole life. I'm tired of careful." He moved, not dramatically, not in the way of stories that announced themselves. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. That was all. But the weight of it was enormous and warm and nothing like she expected, and she turned her hand over and held his. Outside the building, Seoul continued in all its noise and motion. Somewhere in the city, a problem was being resolved by men she would never meet on behalf of a situation she had walked into over a catering tray. Somewhere her roommate was eating fufu and being right about everything. Somewhere a bicycle with an excessive bow was parked outside her building. She sat in a logistics company in Yongsan, holding the hand of a man who ran the city's shadows and was, she now knew with complete certainty, also terrified of exactly this. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. "Don't push it. Let's start with okay." He looked at her, and this time the smile arrived completely. It changed his whole face. It made him look younger and less guarded and almost like a man who had once, in some other version of his life, been completely ordinary. She decided immediately that she was in very serious trouble. And for the first time, she did not mind at all. In the weeks that followed, okay became something larger. He learned that she woke up angry every morning for the first 15 minutes and should not be spoken to directly until she had consumed half a cup of coffee. She learned that he had never once in his adult life slept past 6, and that he cooked exactly 2 things well, doenjang jjigae and fried eggs, and treated both with the same focused seriousness he applied to everything else. She would arrive at the safe apartment she had agreed to stay in for 1 week, and then 2, and then simply stopped arguing about. And he would be there in the evenings sometimes, not always, and they would eat and talk and sit in the comfortable silence that had started at that police station and had simply never gone away. He told her more, not everything. She accepted that. She told him things, too, about her family in Accra. About why she had come to Seoul, not just for work, but because she had needed distance from a version of herself that had been trying too hard to be what everyone around her expected. About the way this city had felt, those first frightening and wonderful months, like she had stepped into a world that did not know her past and therefore could not predict her future. "Do you regret coming?" he asked one evening. She looked at him across the small table. "What do you think?" "I think no." "Then why ask?" "Because I wanted to hear you say it." She recognized the mirror of her own words from the coffee shop and looked at him with the realization that he had held on to that he collected things she said and kept them, that she did the same with him. "No," she said, "I don't regret it." He reached across and moved a strand of her hair from her face. The gesture was so quiet and so careful that it cost her something. She felt it in her throat. "Ko nudo, inus," he said softly, "me too." She was not entirely sure what he was responding to. She did not ask. Some things did not need complete translation. But peace, she was learning, was not a permanent address in his world. It was a room you borrowed. The competitor that had been managed had, it emerged, not been fully managed. There was a meeting. There was a confrontation in the parking structure of a building she was not supposed to know the name of. There were 48 hours in which Hajoon was unreachable, and she sat in the safe apartment with Blessing, who had been brought in on the situation at Abigail's insistence, and had responded by arriving with 2 suitcases, a portable speaker, and absolutely no fear, which was both a comfort and a mild logistical problem. "I could go out there," Blessing said on the second night. "You could not go out there." "I'm just saying I have energy. I could." "Blessing, sit down. I'm not afraid of men in nice suits." "The suits are not the part to be afraid of." Blessing sat down, then immediately stood up again. "Tell me something to do. Pray. I'm already doing that. Do more." They stayed up until past 2. Blessing fell asleep on the sofa. Abigail sat by the window and watched the street and tried not to build disaster scenarios in her head and mostly failed. At 3:17, her phone lit up. "Ko gwenchana, inus." "I'm fine." She put the phone down on her chest and closed her eyes and breathed out from somewhere very deep. 2 letters, 2 syllables. She was embarrassingly undone by 2 syllables. She typed back, "Don't do that again." Then deleted it. Typed, "Good." Deleted that too. Typed, "Ko gwenchanayo inus." "I'm fine too." His reply came in 30 seconds, a single punctuation mark, not a period, not a question mark, just a small symbol she had to zoom in to read. It was a period-shaped mark she recognized from context as the Korean equivalent of a relieved exhale. She had learned recently that Koreans sometimes expressed emotion through punctuation the way she expressed it through tone, and she had found this detail so unexpectedly tender she had kept it to herself for days. She smiled at her phone screen in the dark. Blessing from the sofa without opening her eyes said, "He texted, 'Go back to sleep.'" A pause. "I told you." Blessing. "I told you," she said again, already drifting back under. Abigail shook her head. She looked out the window at the city again. Somewhere in it, in some building with no signage, the man she had met over a catering tray and a cocked gun was still sorting out the business of his complicated life. She thought about what it meant to love someone whose world you could not fully enter. Whether you could build something real at the border of 2 different kinds of existence. Whether careful and brave were really that different or whether they were just the same instinct in different clothes. She did not have clean answers. She was beginning to think clean answers were for simpler stories. When Hajoon came to the apartment the following evening, he said nothing for a long moment. He looked at her with the weight of the past 48 hours still sitting somewhere on him, quiet and heavy. She did not ask for an explanation. She walked up to him and put her arms around him and held on. He went still for exactly 1 second. Then his arms came around her and he held back with the kind of grip that said everything his face would not. They stood like that in the hallway for a while. "Hangul ko ye enus," he said eventually quietly into the top of her head. "Hey, Hangul ko ye enus," she said back. "Thank you for staying. I'm not done being annoyed at you. I know, I have a list. I expected no less." She pulled back and looked at him. He looked back at her. His face was tired and still and completely open in a way she suspected almost no one alive had ever seen. "Saranghae," she said. She had practiced it 3 times in the bathroom that morning. Her pronunciation was, objectively, not perfect. His eyes changed. "Saranghae," he said back, and his was quiet and certain and held none of the almost. It arrived complete. Outside, Seoul did what Seoul always did. It moved, it hummed. It layered its million stories on top of each other without pausing for any single one of them. Inside, Abigail Osa, who had come to this city with 2 bags and a plan that had not included any of this, stood in a hallway in Yongsan with her arms around a man who ran the city's shadows and loved her in the way of someone who had not expected to, and thought, "This is not what I planned." And then she thought, "Good. Some of the best things never are. If you've made it to this moment, don't go anywhere yet. There is more of Abigail and Hajoon coming, and the story is only getting deeper, more complicated, and more honest about what it actually costs to love someone whose world doesn't match yours on paper, but matches you completely in every way that matters." Subscribe right now if you haven't, because new episodes drop every week and you do not want to come in late on this one. Comment below and tell me, did you see that ending coming, and which moment hit you hardest? I read every single comment. I'll see you in the next one.